New Mexico Crime Files, a deep dive into the archives, shocking and notorious cases, the arrests and what led to them, and what happened to the suspect. Here are your hosts, Dean Staley and Jessica Garate. New Mexico Crime Files is sponsored by Medrano Struck Law Firm.
Welcome to another episode of New Mexico Crime Files. I am KRQE's Dean Staley, along with my co-anchor, Jessica Garate.
Dean, always a pleasure.
Always good to be with you, Jess, to get some crime time.
Yes.
Let's get some crime time with Jess from time to time. Yeah, we do this. Now, this first crime we're going to talk about today is unfortunately a really common crime, right? You have someone who's impaired, who's drunk, who's driving, and who hits a pedestrian. In this case, it was a fatal, right? So killed a pedestrian. What was uncommon about this was who was behind the wheel.
Yes, you had a very high-powered attorney, and his passenger was a state police officer. And they got in a lot of trouble in 2008. They were accused of running over and killing a man in Santa Fe, and then they left.
Right. 46-year-old William Tenorio was the victim along the side of the road and gets hit by a car, and they didn't stop. They just kept going. Yeah.
Here's the story.
It was 2 a.m. when patrons came pouring out in the street here from Billy's Blues Club. Witnesses say a BMW was speeding south on Guadalupe Street when it struck a person right here on the road. You can see from the damage on the BMW, the impact was severe. Police say the driver, 36-year-old Carlos Fiero, and his passenger, an unidentified New Mexico State police officer, drove away from the scene. They were pulled over about a mile down the road. Fiero was suspected of being drunk and was arrested at the scene. He was later taken to the hospital to have his blood drawn to see how drunk he was. The state police officer was let go, but he could be charged later as police build their case.
If more information comes forward during the process of the investigation, there is that potential for charges to be filed against the passenger as well.
Fiero is now facing charges of vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of an accident. The victim has been identified as 46-year-old William Tenorio. He's from the Santo Domingo Pueblo. Kim Holland, KRQE News 13.
So just a horrible, heartbreaking crime. Driving drunk, killing somebody, and then not stopping to help, leaving someone to die in the road. Really horrific.
And when he does end up going to trial for this, one of the arguments was like, we weren't sure what we hit. We were like, it's very obvious. Like you have a state police officer that's there with you.
Yeah. That
you just kept going. It was really unbelievable. Now, Carlos Fiero is very well connected to political figures throughout New Mexico.
He was a big name.
Very big name. And so that came into play. And then we did eventually find out the name of the state police officer, Alfred Lavato, who was also indicted on the same charges as Fiero, which was homicide by vehicle. So they had two separate trials.
Right.
And Fiero's trial lasted 2 weeks with the jury deliberating almost 5 days. And the interesting, thing about this trial was there was question and some of his defense was, hey, but the pedestrian we hit wasn't in a crosswalk and had also been drinking.
And was in dark clothes. So there was this idea of how much culpability belongs to the victim in this case who was struck and killed. And if you're the defendant in that case, you're saying, hey, this person is at least partly responsible. I never would have hit them if they weren't drunk and in the road. Right?
Right.
And of course, you don't have, perfect evidence about exactly where he was standing when he was struck.
And you could tell, obviously it took the jury 5 days, and so you could tell they were really torn on trying to figure that out. So here is the story when the jury did reach their verdict.
We find the defendant, Carlos Fiero, guilty of homicide by vehicle.
Jurors say Carlos Fiero is to blame for the death of William Tenorio, but one juror doesn't think he's responsible for leaving the scene of an accident. That charge is left hanging. The juror apparently bought Fiero's claim he thought someone throwing a rock at his car did this to his windshield.
My stomach's just in knots still. So is my heart. My heart still aches for my brother.
Tenorio's family waited days for the verdict after having to hear the gruesome details of the 46-year-old's death.
If he were in our shoes, he'd have done the same thing. It wouldn't have made any difference how long this took. He would have been right here.
Fiero admitted during the trial to driving drunk, hitting a curb, and then hitting Tenorio outside Willie's Blues Bar in Santa Fe in November before he drove off. But during deliberations, the jury told the judge they were confused by one of the jury instructions. Judge Michael Vigil noticed the defense changed 2 words regarding responsibility, making it harder to convict Fiero. The first instruction said jurors could not blame Fiero if Tenorio's actions were significant in his death. The crux of Fiero's defense, that Tenorio was also drunk and wearing dark clothes when he jaywalked. But the judge changed the jury instructions back, saying Fiero is innocent if jurors find Tenorio solely responsible for the crash. The judge admitted the change may open the door for a new trial, something the defense says it will request.
We pretty much knew what was going to happen after the state submitted this modified law and they changed the law in the middle of jury deliberations. I mean, that kind of dictated the result. I mean, he was convicted at that moment when they gave the new law.
So Carlos Fierro sentenced to 7 years in prison. He served 4. I do want to mention, he also made headlines while he was serving that prison sentence because he was out on work detail. A semi loses control along I-10. He was down in Las Cruces serving his time. And the semi loses control, almost hits the work vehicle, and then he gets into a crash. Fiero goes into CPR until the ambulance gets there. So they were like, he's a hero. He helped save this guy. So he did make some more headlines as he went on. After his sentence, he even tried to petition. As we mentioned earlier, he had these very high connections with a lot of politicians. So he tried to petition former Governor Bill Richardson for a pardon, but Richardson did not grant that. And then while he was out on probation, got another DWI, pled guilty to that charge, and was given 24 hours of community service.
Carlos Fiero, a once high-powered attorney who's sitting behind bars once again in the Santa Fe County Detention Center. It's a familiar place for him. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but walked out just 4 years after the crime after earning a lot of good time. His early release caused anger for Tenorio's family and others. When he walked out of prison, Fiero vowed to do some good.
I'm in here for doing something, for making a mistake and doing something wrong. That doesn't define me as a person who I was before I came to prison or who I am now.
Now, Fiero is accused of making the same mistake. He's charged with aggravated DWI and failing to maintain his lane. Because of the holiday, details of his arrest have not been released. We did reach out to Tenorio's family today to get reaction to Fiero's arrest. We did not hear back, but they were clear about their feelings after Fiero's release.
Our father, William Tenorio, taught us to forgive. We have forgiven Carlos Fiero. We ask only that he remember he is not the victim.
So you would think after all this and all he had gone through, he would have learned his lesson.
And I thought that was a remarkably light sentence, too. After having killed somebody in a drunk driving crash, your second DWI after that, right? And you get 24 hours of community. That seemed very strange to me.
And and again, this was a really interesting case because you could hear from even the jury a little confused about the charges he was facing and how much responsibility did the man he hit have. And, you know, they're saying he was drunk and wasn't in a crosswalk. So he was also breaking the law.
Right. And as you mentioned, Jess, the other interesting aspect to this, and this is the legal aspect where Alfred Lavato, the state cop, was charged with vehicular homicide. And the question is, as a passenger, can you be charged? Because he was. Yeah. Right. So that all by itself was an interesting question that hadn't been answered in the courts before.
It really was. And I think a lot of it came from a place of you're an officer. Like, you know, that's what you do. That's what you do as a job. Like, you should have stopped.
You have a higher responsibility, right? You should know better than to just keep driving in this case, right?
If you are a passenger in a car driven by a drunk and the drunk kills somebody, are you just as guilty? The trial of former State Police Sergeant Alfred Lavato may soon answer that question. He is charged with vehicular homicide as the passenger in a high-profile, fatal drunk driving wreck. News 13's Alex Goldsmith is in the Newsplex. Alex?
Dick, legal experts I spoke with today told me this is a very unusual case and one that could give law enforcement a big tool to crack down on DWI.
It just went like just loud.
It was an early November morning in 2008. Carlos Fiero was behind the wheel of his black BMW when he hit and killed William Tenorio in front of a Santa Fe blues bar. Police say Fiero's blood alcohol content was nearly 3 times the legal limit. Riding shotgun was then State Police Sergeant Alfred Lavato. Fiero said during testimony at his trial that Lavato was passed out.
And I looked at Alfred, and he was just, he was down like that. and I just started, hitting him. And I was like, Alfred.
Fiero pled no contest to vehicular homicide less than a year later, but Fiero wasn't the only one charged. Prosecutors brought a vehicular homicide case against Lavato, too, saying he was also liable for the crash. Judge Michael Vigil dismissed the charges in April of 2010. Lavato looked like he was in the clear until the state appealed the decision, and last year the Court of Appeals ruled that the trial could go forward.
It's quite unusual in the law to charge a passenger in this kind of case. It could increase the number of prosecutions for people involved in DWIs, conceivably.
UNM Law School Dean Kevin Washburn used to be a prosecutor himself and says the state is using a creative legal theory to charge Lavato in this case. He says Lavato's possible lack of consciousness may not be the biggest factor in the trial.
Even if he was passed out when the accident occurred, the wrongful act in his case may very well have been encouraging the driver to drive.
Now, there is some precedent for charging passengers for vehicular homicide. The state appeals court ruled in 2009 that Patrick Marquez could be charged with the crime after he encouraged the driver he was riding with to drive drunk. The big difference in that case, Marquez had already pled guilty. Back to you, Dick.
And a judge in this case rejected that because he was not driving. And that became sort of a landmark precedent in New Mexico for you can't charge someone who's not driving for vehicular homicide. And then the question became, was he guilty of leaving the scene of an accident, right? Again, he's not driving, but was he responsible in part because he didn't do anything to say, no, we need to stop, right? He didn't, and the jury in this case found him not guilty of leaving the scene of the accident because he did not pressure, and there was no evidence that he pressured Fiero to keep going. Right. There was no evidence that he said, hey, I know you hit someone, but let's keep going. Yeah. So the jury acquitted him of that charge as well.
That one was always a tough one too, because you're just, you're the passenger. I felt on the other end, you could have demanded, like, we have to stop. Like, you're sitting there and it's on your side when you see that whole hole in the windshield. Like,
yeah, the victim in this case almost came through the window. I mean, that was crazy. Yeah, horrific. So, all right, our next crime that we'll take a look at here on New Mexico Crime Files involves a speeder on I-40 just blowing right past a police officer, a state cop.
And then the officer tries to pull him over, and of course...
And guess what? Guess what, everyone? Guess what happens next? Did he pull over, Jess?
No, he didn't
pull over. Okay. Yeah. We'll have that story when we come back.
New Mexico Crime Files is sponsored by Medrano Struck Law Firm, New Mexico's trusted personal injury attorneys with nearly 40 years of combined experience, fighting for the justice and compensation you deserve. Call 505-217-2200 or visit MedranoStruckLaw.com today. Let's get back to New Mexico Crime Files.
So, Dean, this next story, state police officer is patrolling Interstate 40 when he sees a car just blow right past him. This was in Albuquerque. The officer tries to pull him over. Of course, he's not going to pull over. He takes off and then just causes this chaos again on our interstate, swerving in and out of traffic, driving through neighborhoods, even going the wrong way into oncoming traffic.
All just trying to get out of being stopped by police. And shocking that no one was hurt during that chase.
It finally ends with a crash, but he's still not giving up. He takes off on foot.
Yeah.
Here's the story from February of 2022.
It started on I-40 near the Big I when this car sped by a state police officer on the night of February 17th. The vehicle with 3 people in it was weaving in and out of traffic until exiting on Gibson. The suspect, later identified as Ronnie Rael, drives into a neighborhood and state police let the helicopter take over. State police vehicles catch back up with Rael's car as it hops back on I-25 South and exits Airport Boulevard. That is when police try to end the chase. The vehicle continues on Airport Boulevard, going the wrong way. Rael's vehicle drives down the on-ramp and turns onto University, continuing to drive in the wrong direction. The damaged vehicle at this point loses a tire tread and is on rims. He then crosses back into the right lane of traffic. The officer waits for backup to arrive and then ends the chase with a second pit maneuver.
Watch me bail.
2 of the 3 suspects take off.
You get him, I got this guy! Come here, you're not gonna get away from me! What are you thinking? What are you freaking thinking?
Police arrest both men and search the vehicle, where they find a meth pipe. Ronnie Rael trying to convince the officer he wasn't on drugs.
When was the last time you used meth, bro? About 3 days ago. I haven't had any, I swear to God. Okay. Well, you're showing symptoms of it. Well, I just rashed from you. You don't get, dilated pupils from running, dude.
Rael then apologizes for the chase after being told he's going to jail.
I'm sorry, all right, my bad. You did. I should have stopped. Dude, you could have seriously hurt your buddies. They stole my car. We had just went and got my car back. They stole it. I just got it back. So, I was at first I didn't even know you were the cop until you put the lights on me.
Stephanie Chavez, KRQE News 13.
Again, Jess, I'm just shocked that more people aren't hurt during these chases. This is absolutely crazy. And when you recognize in the video a place that you go to all the time, right? This is the on-ramp at the airport. You see the airport in the background there, and he's going the wrong way. He's going in the direction of people who would be leaving the airport to get on I-25 there. And the fact that he didn't run into somebody is astounding.
Just right through those barricades. It's crazy. And then he gets on the freeway the wrong way. And then this is when my dear friend Dean Staley always says this, when we're like, what was this guy thinking? How could he possibly do this? Why, he's and you can't, because, obviously you could tell he was high on drugs and really made some very bad decisions.
Not in the proper state right there.
And then it makes me mad when you see these videos and they're tearing through all of our nice stuff through the Sunport. You see them like off into the ditch and just
the amount of damage that he did just to road signs and landscaping and all that other stuff. Crazy. So Ronnie Rael pleaded, he was indicted in March of 2023. He pleads guilty to aggravated fleeing and DWI, sentenced to 18 months at MDC, and then 2.5 years of probation. But that's not the end of the story, Jess.
No, not at all. In August, he had a probation violation on drug use. So he faced more charges, and then was picked up and is awaiting sentencing for the probation violation. So still, to this day, getting in trouble.
Yeah, let's hope he finds his way out of this lifestyle.
Yes.
So, all right, the next crime that we're going to take you inside of involves a Bernalillo County Sheriff's deputy who was working special detail when George W. Bush was in town for a fundraiser, working security for that detail, and then comes home to find a burglar leaving his house. Like just the timing of this is like, oh, hey, how's it going? That's my house.
Picked the wrong house, wrong timing. Yeah. We'll have that story coming up. This goes in our dumb crook file.
Did you pull out the folder?
Yeah, I've got a whole. I mean, that folder's too big to bring in.
We got a room.
But
we got a room filled with those files. Yeah.
This one was back from May 27th of 2008. President Bush came to Albuquerque for a fundraiser, and this deputy was part of the detail. They have to block off all the roads and make sure everything is safe and prepared for when a president comes to visit.
Right. So he's got a long day working as the special detail for the president's visit. After a long day, Bernalillo County Sheriff's deputy heads back to his house to find a man leaving his house who doesn't belong in his house.
Yeah. And can you imagine you're coming out and you just realize that you just hit a deputy's house?
Yeah.
So most people would probably, not try to, they just let the burglar take off running.
Maybe give you a chance to get away. Not in this case.
Not at all. Yeah. Here's a story again back from 2008.
35-year-old Joseph Ballejos is the suspect who didn't get away. He was caught after a dangerous escape. Sheriff's deputies say Ballejos broke into a deputy's home near Eubank and Glendale Northeast. He apparently had just loaded some loot into his SUV and was getting in it when the sergeant came home at 3 o'clock.
He turned around, tried to stop the car didn't stop, fled from the scene. The sergeant was concerned someone else might still be back in his house, so he returned back to his house.
The suspect fled to Paseo del Norte and I-25. The suspect then came the wrong way down the I-25 off-ramp. You can see his tracks right here as he ditched off the road down this hillside and landed right by the fence. Panhandler Jeffrey McKnight saw the suspect and called 911. Deputies were in the area immediately.
Seen one and flagged him down and said, hey, over here.
After canvassing the area with deputies and a canine, officers found Ballejos hiding in this ditch. Police then discovered this vehicle was stolen. There was plenty of stolen stuff inside too, including a flat screen TV and a camera that belonged to the sergeant.
I think he's pretty damn stupid. You know, maybe he'll learn from his mistake.
You know what I like about this story, Jess? If there's anything to like about it, I like that you've got a guy on the side of the road who's panhandling, who's just concerned about doing the right thing. Hey, call the cops. I just saw this happen. And then when the cops get there, he's like, he's down there. He's down there. You know,
he's trying to hide from
some
you.
Some good
but
people in this world who are, you know, not in the best circumstances maybe, but they're really still good people trying to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Gave a great interview and really added to that story.
And the deputy in this case, I had forgotten, didn't chase him right away. Chased him and then said, I got to get back to my house because I don't know if someone else is there. Right? So that was interesting. And then everyone else was on the alert. Okay, Sarge had his house broken into. We're looking for this car. Right?
And, of course, the car is stolen.
Yeah, of course.
Ballejos was charged with a slew of crimes: aggravated burglary, reckless driving, having a gun, possessions of a lot of stolen stuff that he had just taken from that house.
Right. So this was in May of 2008 was the crime. 2009, he pleads guilty, does Ballejos. And in 2010, he's sentenced. He didn't show up, though, for a sentencing. So there's a warrant for his arrest and even more charges.
In April of that year, he received new charges for the aggravated burglary. In September of 2010, all his cases were dismissed.
Why was that, Jess? What happened in this case?
Authorities say he has since passed away before he could be picked up. So
sometimes time runs out.
Yeah.
So tough one.
Yeah.
But this is another one of those cases where you have someone committing, you know, not just a burglary, but then he's got stolen stuff in his car, in his stolen car, and then he's running from police, and then he's ditching the car and just creating mayhem in the community.
Going the wrong way on the freeway.
Yeah.
Bunch of people around.
Mm-hmm. Lucky no one was hurt in this one.
Well, Dean, that wraps up another New Mexico Crime Files for us.
Yeah, let's make a date for the next New Mexico Crime Files.
Can't wait. We're combing through some of our high-profile cases, so we'll be bringing those to you.
We'll see you back here.